"Enjoy, rancher. She bites," the Apache trader said, but the rancher didn't buy her to save himself. There was peace in the routine of feeding the cattle, repairing fences, and walking the land at dawn. The sky, the open fields, and the sound of hooves on soft earth were his companions, but life on the ranch was not without challenges. Harsh weather, roaming predators, and the loneliness of long days often tested his patience and strength. Still, Daniel loved it. He loved the freedom, the work, and the sense that each day belonged entirely to him. One late afternoon, as Daniel was returning from checking the northern fence line, he saw something unusual on the dirt road leading to the ranch. A small caravan of traders had appeared, their horses kicking up dust as they moved slowly. Daniel frowned. Traders were not a common sight in these parts. Most people in town preferred to meet far from ranches, in markets or trading posts. These traders, however, were coming straight to his land. His curiosity pulled him forward. As the caravan came closer, Daniel noticed the leader. He was an Apache man with sharp eyes and strong features. There was something in his gaze that suggested he had seen much in life, both beauty and danger. He walked with confidence, every step measured, as if he had traveled through storms and deserts for years. Behind him, a large cage sat on the back of a cart. Inside, Daniel could make out movement, shadows that shifted and twisted in ways no ordinary animal would. The man stopped a few paces from Daniel, smiled faintly, and said, "Enjoy, rancher." "She bites." The words hung in the air, more like a warning than a jest. Daniel's eyebrows lifted, but he didn't flinch. Most people would have laughed nervously or stepped back, but something about the man and his words intrigued Daniel. He walked closer to the cage, leaning slightly forward to see inside. Within the cage, Daniel saw her, a young wolf. She was fierce, with eyes that glowed amber in the fading sunlight. Her fur was thick and slightly matted, evidence of life on the harsh plains. Her teeth gleamed when she growled softly, a low, warning sound that made Daniel feel both caution and fascination. She was clearly dangerous, untamed, yet there was something more, a spark of intelligence, a curiosity in her gaze that seemed to look directly into him. The Apache trader laughed softly, noticing Daniel's interest. "She isn't for everyone," he said. "Many try to tame her, but she will not bend. Most will fail. Most are afraid, but maybe you're different." Daniel did not answer immediately. He studied the wolf, observing her movements as she shifted from one paw to another, ears twitching at every sound, tail flicking with quiet agitation. She was wild, proud, and unbroken. Daniel thought about the life she must have had before this moment. The desert and plains could be cruel. A young wolf had to survive by wit, speed, and courage. Injuries, hunger, storms, predators, all of these shaped her, and yet there she was, alive, alert, and defiant. Daniel felt a connection he could not explain. He did not see a beast to be tamed, he saw a life, a spirit fighting to exist against all odds. The Apache man seemed to notice this understanding. He nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself. "You don't fear her," he said. "Many fear what they cannot control, but you see her differently." Daniel shrugged. "I respect her," he replied simply. Respect was different from fear. Respect did not demand control, it demanded understanding. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, studying Daniel. After a long moment, he said, "She will test you. She will bite if you try to own her. But she is worth the risk, if you are willing to see the world through her eyes." "I just want to understand." The wolf's ears twitched. Her eyes held him in a silent exchange, a communication that needed no words. Neighbors and passers-by had often warned Daniel about trusting wild creatures, but he had always felt differently. The ranch taught him patience. The cattle taught him observation, and the land itself taught him respect. He understood that the wolf's bite was not a threat in the sense people feared. It was her way of saying, "I am not yours, I am free." And Daniel understood freedom. After another long silence, Daniel made his decision. He reached for his wallet, and after a few careful exchanges, he bought the wolf. The Apache trader smiled, as though Daniel's choice confirmed something he had suspected. "Take good care of her," he said. "She will teach you much if you are ready to learn." With that, the trader and his caravan moved on, leaving Daniel alone with the wolf. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains, and the first stars began to appear in the evening sky. Daniel looked at the cage, now fully alone. He could feel the wolf's tension, her body coiled like a spring, ready to defend herself at any moment. But he did not fear her. He felt anticipation, curiosity, and a deep respect. For hours he simply watched, learning the rhythm of her breathing, the way her eyes followed him, and the silent intelligence in every movement. That night, as he fed the cattle and repaired the fence under the silver light of the moon, he thought about what the wolf had already begun to teach him: patience, observation, and the subtle language of trust. For Daniel, that day marked the beginning of something extraordinary. It was not just the arrival of a wild animal on his ranch. It was the arrival of a new life, a challenge that would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. The plains seemed wider, the wind sharper, and the night alive with possibility. And though the wolf had yet to step out of the cage, Daniel already felt a bond forming, a connection rooted in respect, courage, and the unspoken understanding that they were both survivors of the harsh world around them. He slept that night with the soft sounds of the plains in the distance, and sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, he thought he heard the wolf's growl mingling with the wind, a reminder that life, wild and untamed, had a new companion on the ranch. He did not know what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time in years, Daniel felt the stirrings of excitement, the kind that comes from knowing that the ordinary can suddenly become extraordinary. By dawn, he was ready. The wolf was still in her cage, but Daniel's mind was already forming plans. Not to tame her, not to control her, but to understand her. He knew it would be difficult. She would bite, she would resist, she would test him in ways he had never been tested. But Daniel also knew this. The wolf had entered his life for a reason. And when he finally opened the cage door, he would step into a new chapter, one that promised lessons, surprises, and a bond unlike any other. That morning, the ranch looked different. The plains stretched wider, the sky felt higher, and every sound, the clatter of cattle, the whisper of the wind, the distant call of birds, seemed sharper, more alive. Daniel took a deep breath and approached the cage. The wolf looked up, her amber eyes locking with his. There was no fear, no malice, just recognition. And in that recognition, Daniel understood something vital. This was the beginning, and everything beyond that moment would be a journey they would take together. After the trader had left, Daniel was alone with the wolf. The cage sat in the corner of the barn, and she paced inside, her paws tapping softly against the wooden floor. Her eyes never left him, watching, calculating, waiting. Daniel could feel the tension in her body. She was aware, alert, and ready for anything. He understood that this was her nature, and he respected it. He did not reach into the cage, did not try to touch her immediately. Instead, he chose observation. He wanted to learn her movements, her moods, and the way she responded to the world around her. He began by bringing small things close to the cage: a bowl of water, a few pieces of fresh meat, and clean hay for her bedding. Each time he spoke softly, almost in a whisper, introducing himself in a calm, measured tone. The wolf growled at first, low and threatening, but Daniel did not flinch. Instead, he continued to approach slowly, letting her set the pace. He knew that trust was not given freely. It had to be earned. Every time she allowed him to place food closer to her, it was a small victory. Every cautious sniff she gave in his direction was progress. Days passed, and the wolf began to show signs of curiosity. Her ears twitched when Daniel moved about the barn, and her tail occasionally flicked in response to his presence. She would study him for long periods, tilting her head as though trying to understand his intentions. Daniel found himself talking to her constantly, narrating his day, explaining his routines, and sharing stories from his life on the ranch. Though she did not respond with words, her eyes followed him, and he imagined she understood more than he could ever know. He decided to give her a name. Names carried meaning, he believed, and they could create a bond. After watching her at dusk one evening, as the last rays of sunlight turned her fur golden, he called her Luna. She froze for a moment, ears perked, as if she was considering the sound. Then she continued pacing, still alert but somehow calmer. Daniel repeated the name gently, and over the next few days he noticed she began to respond to it, turning her head when he called her softly. It was a small connection, but a connection nonetheless. Neighbors soon began to notice the changes at Daniel's ranch. Some came out of curiosity, others out of concern. "Why would you bring a wild wolf onto your land?" they asked. "It's dangerous. You could get hurt." Daniel would smile politely and reply, "She isn't here to hurt anyone. She's just learning her place here, and I'm learning mine." Many of them shook their heads, unconvinced. They could not see what he saw, the intelligence in Luna's eyes, the balance of caution and curiosity, the undeniable spark of life that demanded respect. Daniel understood that the wolf's nature was both her strength and her challenge. She could not be controlled, nor should she be. Every bite, every snarl, every warning growl was her way of saying, "I am not yours, I am free." And Daniel respected that freedom. He began to change his routines, walking more slowly around the barn, speaking in softer tones and avoiding sudden movements. He observed her reactions to light, sounds, and the smallest changes in the environment. Through this patience, he learned more than he had from books or neighbors' advice. He learned from experience, from the living, breathing presence of Luna. One morning, Daniel decided to open the cage slightly, just enough for Luna to step out if she chose. He left the door cracked open and backed away, sitting quietly on a bale of hay. The barn was still, filled with the scent of hay, dirt, and the faint smell of the wolf herself. Hours passed. Luna paced near the door, glancing at him, then at the open space beyond the cage. She sniffed, paused, and then retreated slightly, still hesitant. Daniel remained patient, knowing that any sudden movement could scare her. The sun climbed higher, and he realized that trust could not be rushed. It had to grow naturally over time. During the afternoons, Daniel would bring her toys and objects to explore. Branches, leather strips, and small balls of rope became part of her learning. She would sniff, bite, and push them around, showing bursts of energy and intelligence. Daniel noticed how alert she remained, how she analyzed every movement before reacting. He marveled at her instincts, realizing that wildness was not chaos. It was a kind of order he had rarely seen before. She moved with a purpose, always aware, always calculating. Daniel felt both humbled and inspired by her presence. It was not just Luna who was learning. Daniel was changing too. He began to understand the subtleties of her behavior, the way her ears twitched at distant sounds, the tension in her muscles when strangers approached, and the way she relaxed only when she trusted the environment. He realized that the wolf was teaching him patience, empathy, and observation. He was learning to slow down, to notice details he had once overlooked, and to respect the world in a new way. His ranch, once quiet and predictable, now felt alive with possibility. One evening, Daniel decided to test Luna's courage gently. He placed a small piece of meat on the ground a few feet from the open cage door. He stepped back and waited. Luna froze for a moment, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the prize. Then slowly she approached, cautious but determined. She sniffed, took the meat in her mouth, and retreated back to the safety of the cage. Daniel smiled. He clapped softly, careful not to startle her, and spoke encouragingly. It was a small victory, but significant. Luna had made the choice to engage with him, and he knew the foundation of trust had begun to take shape. As days turned into weeks, the bond between Daniel and Luna grew stronger. She still had her moments of defiance, growling or snapping if she felt threatened, but these were fewer and farther between. He began to notice her watching him in ways that suggested understanding, as if she could sense his moods and intentions. He began to anticipate her reactions, predicting when she would approach or when she would retreat. They were learning each other, step by step, without words, without force, only through respect and patience. Neighbors' curiosity turned into admiration. Some would stop by to watch, amazed at the sight of the wild wolf moving gracefully around the barn, interacting with Daniel without fear. Children whispered stories of the wolf that belonged to no one but still listened. Daniel, however, never claimed ownership. He knew better. Luna was not a pet or a possession. She was a companion, a teacher, and a living reminder of the wildness that existed just beyond the edges of civilization. Winter approached, and the days grew colder. Daniel prepared the barn for the coming frost, ensuring Luna had warm bedding and plenty of food. She adapted quickly to the routines but remained vigilant, her senses always sharp. Daniel often caught her watching the horizon, ears perked, as if listening to sounds far beyond his own perception. He felt a deep respect for her independence. She was a survivor, a creature of instinct, and he was privileged to share space with her. By the time the first snow fell, Luna had made a significant change. She would step out of the cage voluntarily, exploring the barn and nearby fields under Daniel's watchful eye. She had not been tamed, not in the traditional sense, but she had chosen to trust him. Daniel realized this was the essence of their relationship, choice. She could leave at any time, but she stayed. She could bite, scratch, or flee, but she remained. And in that decision, Daniel found both responsibility and profound connection. That winter, Daniel often sat near the fire, Luna curled nearby, watching the flames flicker. He reflected on what he had learned so far. Trust could not be forced, freedom was not the absence of guidance, and respect was the bridge between worlds, the human and the wild. He realized that buying her had not been an act of ownership, but an act of commitment. He had committed to understanding, learning, and coexisting. And in return, Luna had committed to allowing him a glimpse into her world. The bond between them continued to deepen in quiet, unspoken ways. Daniel noticed small gestures. Luna would nuzzle him gently when he was sad, or sit quietly nearby when he worked late. He began to anticipate her needs, bringing extra food before the cold nights, clearing paths through snow, and providing warmth and safety. She, in turn, showed her trust through patience, by tolerating his presence without fear, and by gradually exploring beyond the barn. Through these early weeks, Daniel understood an essential truth. He had not purchased the wolf to save himself, nor to control her. He had welcomed her into his life to share a journey of mutual respect, learning, and discovery. Luna was not just an animal, she was a mirror, reflecting the strength, patience, and empathy that Daniel had long neglected in his own life. She challenged him, taught him, and reminded him daily that the wild was not to be conquered but understood. By the end of the season, the bond between Daniel and Luna had become unmistakable. She followed his voice, responded to his calls, and even began to anticipate his actions. The ranch, once quiet and predictable, now thrummed with life, energy, and possibility. Daniel knew the challenges ahead would be many, but he also knew that together, he and Luna could face them. And in the silent understanding that passed between them, he felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Daniel and Luna grew stronger, deeper, and more complex. What had begun as cautious observation had transformed into a silent understanding, a connection that needed no words. Luna, though still fierce and independent, began to show subtle signs of affection and trust. She would follow Daniel at a distance as he walked through the fields, her eyes alert yet calm, as if silently acknowledging that he belonged there with her. Daniel, in turn, learned to watch for her cues, the tilt of her head, the twitch of her ears, the flick of her tail, and adjust his actions accordingly. Each morning, Daniel would wake before dawn to tend the cattle. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of earth and grass, and often the distant howl of a wild wolf echoed across the plains. Luna would be waiting for him near the barn, her eyes reflecting the first light of day. She never rushed him, never demanded attention. Instead, she moved gracefully alongside him as he performed his chores, a silent partner in the rhythm of ranch life. Her presence made the work lighter, less lonely, and more meaningful. One morning, as Daniel led a small herd to the northern grazing fields, Luna moved ahead, scouting the path. She stopped occasionally, sniffing the wind, alerting Daniel to potential dangers: a loose fence, a sudden drop in the ground, or the distant movement of other animals. He realized then that she had become more than a companion. She was a guardian. Her instincts were sharper than his, her senses attuned to the land in ways he had never imagined. He felt gratitude, humility, and awe all at once. She was teaching him lessons that no human teacher could provide. Despite her growing trust, Luna remained wild in heart. She would sometimes bolt suddenly, chasing a rabbit or investigating a strange sound in the distance. Daniel never tried to stop her. He understood that freedom was part of her essence. Instead, he let her roam, calling softly if she wandered too far, watching as she returned willingly when she was ready. Those moments reminded him that the bond between them was not built on control but on choice. Luna chose to stay near him because she wanted to, not because she had to. Over time, Daniel noticed changes in himself as well. He became more patient, more observant, and more attuned to the rhythms of life on the ranch. He found himself thinking like Luna sometimes, alert, cautious, and aware of the smallest shifts in the environment. The work that once felt solitary now had companionship, though it was not human companionship, but something equally profound. He found joy in the quiet moments, watching Luna drink from the stream, listening to her soft whines when she played with the wind, or observing her carefully study the patterns of the grazing cattle. Winter arrived, and with it, new challenges. Snow blanketed the plains, making paths slippery and hiding potential dangers. Predators, too, became more active in search of food. Daniel prepared the ranch, reinforcing fences, stacking firewood, and ensuring the cattle were safe and warm. Luna's behavior reflected the change in season. She was cautious, alert, and restless, often pacing at the edge of the barn and watching the horizon. Daniel could sense her concern, and he knew she was not just reacting instinctively. She was thinking, planning, and protecting. One particularly harsh evening, a pack of coyotes approached the edge of the ranch. Daniel noticed the movement too late to warn the cattle, but Luna did not hesitate. With a low growl, she leapt into action, positioning herself between the coyotes and the herd. Her movements were precise, calculated, and fearless. The coyotes hesitated, growling and snapping at her, but Luna did not retreat. She circled, darted, and barked sharply, her eyes blazing with determination. Daniel watched in awe, realizing that the wolf he had rescued was now saving lives, not just her own, but his and the cattle's as well. That night, after the coyotes had retreated and the ranch was quiet once more, Daniel approached Luna carefully. She was panting slightly, her fur dusted with snow, but her eyes held no fear. He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her back. She did not pull away. Instead, she leaned slightly into his touch, a silent acknowledgement of the partnership they had formed. In that moment, Daniel understood that the bond between them was complete, not because he had tamed her, but because she had chosen him as a companion and protector, just as he had chosen her. The days that followed were filled with routine, yet never monotonous. Daniel and Luna developed a rhythm that suited them both. He would rise early, feed the cattle, check fences, and tend to the land, while Luna followed at a measured distance, always watching, always alert. They shared quiet moments in the evenings, sitting by the fire in the barn or walking under the stars. Daniel often spoke to her, sharing stories from his life, reflecting on his past and contemplating the future. Luna listened, or at least it seemed so. Her presence was calming, grounding, and a constant reminder of the wild beauty that existed beyond the fences of civilization. Visitors to the ranch began to notice the change as well. Friends, neighbors, and travelers would come by, curious to see the wolf that had grown so closely connected to a man. Some were fearful, warning Daniel of the dangers of keeping such a wild animal nearby. Others were fascinated, watching as Luna moved gracefully, respectfully, yet independently around the ranch. Daniel never tried to impress anyone. He knew that Luna was not a spectacle. She was a teacher, a guardian, and a companion. Those who observed her could learn if they chose to, but the bond she shared with Daniel was theirs alone. Spring arrived, bringing new life and renewed energy. Calves were born, the grasses grew tall and green, and the ranch buzzed with activity. Luna's role expanded naturally. She became a protector not just of Daniel but of the new animals as well. She would watch over the young calves, ensuring they were safe from predators. Her presence reassured Daniel, allowing him to focus on other tasks while knowing that Luna's instincts were constantly at work. He realized that the wolf had integrated herself into the life of the ranch seamlessly, yet on her own terms, maintaining her independence while fulfilling her role as guardian. Daniel often reflected on the lessons he had learned from Luna. Patience, he realized, was not simply waiting, it was observing, understanding, and responding thoughtfully. Respect was not about dominance, it was about acknowledging the strength and wisdom of another being. Trust was not demanded, it was earned, nurtured, and cherished. Luna had taught him these lessons without words, without force, and without expectation. She had simply existed in his life, allowing him to learn from her presence and actions. The bond between man and wolf also brought unexpected joy. On quiet evenings, Daniel would watch Luna play, her movements fluid and graceful, as she chased shadows or pounced on fallen leaves. Her energy was contagious, lifting his spirits and reminding him of the beauty of the natural world. He found himself laughing more, appreciating the small moments and seeing the ranch through new eyes. Luna had transformed not just the land, but his life, bringing color, excitement, and depth to days that might have otherwise passed unnoticed. There were challenges, of course. Luna was not without her moods. Sometimes she would retreat, refusing to engage, growling softly when Daniel approached too quickly. Other times she would test boundaries, snapping at objects or startling him with sudden bursts of energy. Yet Daniel never took these moments personally. He had learned that her behavior was communication, a way of expressing her needs, frustrations, or caution. By listening carefully and observing closely, he could respond appropriately, strengthening their bond further. Through these experiences, Daniel understood something fundamental. He had not rescued Luna to save her. He had bought her cage, yes, but the gift she gave him in return was far greater. She had taught him humility, patience, and the art of observation. She had shown him that life could be richer when approached with understanding rather than control. And she had reminded him of the beauty and complexity of the wild, the untamed, fierce, and brilliant spirit that thrived beyond fences and expectations. By the end of Part 3, Daniel and Luna were no longer just man and wolf. They were companions, partners, and equals in a shared world. Each had grown from the other, learning lessons that neither could have anticipated. The ranch, once quiet and predictable, now thrummed with life, energy, and possibility. Daniel understood that the wolf had chosen to stay not because she was tamed, but because she saw in him a kindred spirit, someone who respected her, valued her, and shared the rhythm of life with her. The connection was silent but profound. They walked together, worked together, and lived together, each learning from the other in ways words could never capture. Luna was no longer just a wolf who bit or a wild animal to be tamed. She was a teacher, a guardian, and a companion. And Daniel, in turn, had become more patient, observant, and alive, shaped by the presence of a creature who existed freely yet chose to share her life with him. Winter had settled deeply over the plains, covering the ranch in thick blankets of snow. The air was sharp, cold, and unforgiving, and Daniel knew that survival required vigilance. The cattle huddled together in the barn for warmth, and the fences, heavy with ice, demanded constant attention. Despite the hardships, Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction. He had learned to work with the seasons, to anticipate nature's challenges, and to rely on Luna in ways he had never expected. She had become more than a companion. She was a partner in survival, her instincts complementing his own knowledge of the land. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, Daniel noticed movement near the far edge of the grazing fields. A pack of coyotes had approached, drawn by hunger and opportunity. Their eyes glinted in the fading light and their low growls carried across the cold wind. Daniel's heart tightened. He had dealt with predators before, but a pack this large was dangerous. The cattle were spread out, some grazing too close to the tree line, others near the fences, unaware of the threat that lurked beyond. He looked toward Luna. She was lying near the barn, her fur dusted with snow, but her ears twitched sharply as she sensed the approaching danger. Without hesitation, she rose to her feet, her body taut and ready. Daniel realized that the warning he had learned to read in her movements had never been more precise. Her growl was low and steady, a signal that danger was near and that she was prepared to act. The coyotes, sensing her presence, paused at the edge of the clearing, their eyes fixed on the wolf who had become their unspoken adversary. Daniel tried to remain calm. He moved slowly toward the barn, checking the gates and ensuring the cattle were safe. He knew that Luna would not act recklessly. She would strategize, observe, and defend with intelligence. He watched as she shifted her stance, circling slightly, her eyes scanning the coyote's movements. Her tail flicked with precision, her ears moved independently, catching the faintest of sounds. Daniel marveled at her instincts. She was not merely reacting, she was calculating, planning, and leading. The coyotes began to advance, their growls rising in intensity. Daniel's heart pounded, but he trusted Luna completely. She stepped forward, positioning herself between the pack and the nearest cattle. She moved with speed and precision, darting left and right, her teeth bared and growls echoing across the snow-covered plains. The coyotes lunged at her, testing her defenses, but Luna did not falter. She dodged, circled, and countered with bursts of energy that seemed almost choreographed. Daniel realized that the wolf he had rescued had become the protector of the ranch, defending life with courage he had only admired from afar. For hours, the struggle continued. Luna's movements were tireless, her endurance remarkable. She used the landscape to her advantage, driving the coyotes away from the cattle, keeping them in sight, and never letting them gain confidence. Daniel assisted where he could, shouting and making noise to deter the predators, but Luna was the leader in this confrontation. Her instincts guided her, and her intelligence ensured that every move was calculated for maximum effect. Daniel felt awe and gratitude. He had not anticipated that the bond they had formed would translate into such fierce protection and loyalty. Finally, as the last light of day faded, the coyotes retreated, slipping back into the shadows of the surrounding woods. Luna stood tall, her chest heaving, her fur matted with snow, yet her eyes still sharp and alert. Daniel approached slowly, careful not to startle her. She did not retreat but turned her gaze to him, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. In that glance, Daniel understood something profound. Luna had not fought out of obedience or fear, but out of choice and loyalty. She had chosen to defend him, the ranch, and the cattle, proving that their partnership was now unbreakable. That night, as Daniel stoked the fire in the barn, he watched Luna curl up nearby, her body relaxed but still alert. He reflected on the events of the day, realizing that this was a turning point in their relationship. She was no longer just a wild companion. She had become an integral part of the ranch, a guardian whose instincts were unmatched. The experience also reminded him of the unpredictability of nature, of the delicate balance between survival and chaos. Luna had reminded him that life, no matter how routine it seemed, could always be challenged, and that courage was not defined by fearlessness, but by action in the face of danger. Over the next few weeks, Daniel continued to observe Luna closely. He noticed how the experience with the coyotes had affected her. She moved with even greater awareness, her senses finely tuned to every sound, smell, and movement. She would patrol the edges of the ranch, occasionally stopping to listen, sniff, or scan the horizon. Daniel followed her example, learning to see the land through her perspective. He realized that their connection had grown deeper, that they now operated in a shared understanding of the environment, each anticipating the other's actions without words or commands. The winter was harsh, but Daniel and Luna thrived together. They shared long days and cold nights, their bond strengthened by experience and mutual respect. Daniel learned to read her moods, noticing subtle changes in posture or expression that signaled hunger, concern, or curiosity. Luna, in turn, seemed to understand his routines and intentions, adjusting her behavior accordingly. Their companionship became a rhythm, a dance of trust and observation that carried them through the challenges of the season. One particularly stormy night, the wind howled across the plains, rattling the barn and driving the snow into drifts. Daniel worked by lamplight, ensuring that the cattle were secure and that the fences could withstand the storm. Luna stayed close, alert to every sound outside. At one point, a tree branch cracked under the weight of snow, and Luna's ears twitched immediately. She moved to investigate, her body low and controlled, signaling to Daniel that something required attention. Together, they ensured that no harm came to the herd, their cooperation seamless and instinctive. Through these experiences, Daniel reflected on what he had learned from Luna. Courage, he realized, was not a human trait alone. It could be found in the wild, in the instincts of an animal who faced danger without hesitation. Loyalty was not demanded, but freely given, and trust was built through shared experience and understanding. Luna had shown him that life's lessons often came from unexpected places, and that the strongest bonds were forged not through control or possession, but through mutual respect and care. By the end of winter, the ranch felt transformed. Luna was no longer just a wolf who lived on the property. She was a protector, a companion, and a teacher. Daniel saw the land differently now, appreciating the subtle movements of the animals, the hidden signs of predators, and the delicate balance that sustained life on the plains. He had always loved the ranch, but with Luna at his side, it had become a living, breathing world filled with wonder, challenge, and partnership. Daniel also realized that their relationship had changed him in ways he could not have anticipated. He was more patient, more observant, and more connected to the natural world. He had learned to act without rushing, to listen without speaking, and to understand without judgment. Luna had taught him that the wild was not to be conquered, but respected, and that true strength lay not in domination, but in coexistence. The story of that winter, of Luna defending the ranch from the coyotes, became a quiet legend in the surrounding areas. Travelers who passed by the plains spoke of the wolf who guarded the ranch, not as a pet, but as a fierce, intelligent, and loyal companion. Daniel never boasted of her courage. He knew that she acted out of instinct and choice, and that their bond was something sacred, private, and profound. It was a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared experience, lessons he would carry with him for the rest of his life. By the time spring approached, the snow had melted, and the plains began to bloom with new life. Daniel looked at Luna, her fur sleek and strong, her eyes bright with intelligence. He realized that the events of the past months had shaped them both, forging a connection that could not be broken. She had faced danger, protected those in need, and chosen to remain by his side. And in return, he had respected her freedom, learned from her instincts, and shared his life with her in a way that honored her spirit. That winter had been more than a test. It had been a revelation. Daniel understood now that Luna's bite, her growl, and her fierce independence were not signs of defiance to overcome, but expressions of a life lived fully and freely. By acknowledging and respecting those traits, he had formed a bond that was rare, precious, and transformative. Together, they had faced danger, survived adversity, and emerged stronger, connected, and wiser. As the first flowers of spring appeared and the plains warmed under the sun, Daniel and Luna stood together, watching over the ranch. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons she had taught him, the protection she had offered, and the companionship she had provided. She was more than a wolf, more than an animal. She was a partner, a guardian, and a teacher. And Daniel knew that their story, though still unfolding, would continue to inspire, teach, and strengthen them both in the seasons to come. Spring had fully arrived at the ranch, bringing warmth, color, and a sense of renewal. The plains stretched wide and golden, the trees whispered in the gentle wind, and the cattle grazed contentedly in the open fields. Daniel walked among them, observing each animal with care and attention. By now, he had come to know the rhythms of the land intimately, but there was one presence that continued to surprise, inspire, and challenge him every day. Luna. The wolf had grown in both strength and grace. Her fur gleamed in the sunlight, her muscles moved with quiet power, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence that had first drawn Daniel to her. Yet she was no longer just a fierce protector. She had become a companion in the truest sense, sharing in the daily life of the ranch, yet always maintaining her independence. She would roam the fields, explore the distant tree lines, and even return after long excursions as though checking in on her human friend. Daniel admired her freedom as much as her loyalty. Neighbors and travelers often stopped by to catch a glimpse of the legendary wolf. Some came out of curiosity, others out of disbelief. "Does she really live here with you?" they would ask. Daniel would smile quietly. "She chooses to be here," he would reply. Many were fascinated, watching Luna move through the fields, observing the cattle, or playing in the wind. Children whispered excitedly about her, telling tales of the wolf who was not a pet but a living symbol of wild loyalty. Daniel did not correct them, but in his heart he knew the truth. Luna was more than a story. She was a teacher, a guardian, and a friend who had changed his life in ways he could not have imagined. Daniel often reflected on the years they had spent together. He remembered the first day he had seen her in the cage, the warning from the Apache trader, and the slow, careful steps that had led to their connection. He realized that buying her had not been an act of bravery or heroism. It had been an act of openness and respect. By choosing to see her as a living, thinking being, rather than a wild animal to be tamed, he had allowed a bond to form that was rare and precious. That bond had carried them through danger, taught them patience, and transformed the life of the ranch. One warm afternoon, as Daniel repaired a fence on the northern edge of the property, Luna appeared at his side. She had been patrolling the tree line, her ears alert and body tense, but now she relaxed as she approached him. He knelt to inspect the post he was fixing, and she settled nearby, watching intently. Their silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Daniel realized that he no longer needed words to communicate with her. A glance, a gesture, a soft sound was enough. Their partnership had evolved into a language of its own, a language built on trust, observation, and mutual respect. That evening, Daniel sat by the fire in the barn, reflecting on the life they had shared. He thought about the winter when Luna had defended the cattle from the pack of coyotes. He remembered the adrenaline, the fear, and the awe he had felt as he watched her act with courage and intelligence. That moment had solidified their connection, proving that trust and loyalty could transcend species, that understanding and respect could create bonds stronger than fear or instinct alone. Luna had not just protected the ranch. She had shown him the meaning of courage, partnership, and choice. Daniel also recognized the lessons Luna had taught him beyond danger and survival. She had shown him how to appreciate the small moments, the way the sun lit the plains at dawn, the patterns of birds in the sky, the subtle shifts in wind and weather that signaled change. She had taught him to slow down, to observe, and to act with care. Where once he might have rushed through chores or overlooked signs of trouble, he now moved thoughtfully, attuned to the land and to the creatures within it. Luna's presence had transformed not just his days, but his perspective on life itself. As the season progressed, Daniel noticed how Luna interacted with the young calves. She would watch over them from a distance, occasionally nudging one away from danger or alerting him if a predator approached. Her actions were precise, protective, and wise. He realized that she had become an integral part of the ranch's ecosystem, not as a pet, but as a living participant in its survival and harmony. The cattle, in turn, seemed to recognize her presence as safe and comforting, moving calmly in her proximity. Daniel marveled at the balance she had brought to the land, the quiet authority and instinct that had transformed the ranch into a safer, more vibrant place. Daniel began to share the story of Luna with others, not to boast, but to inspire. Visitors came to see the wolf who had chosen to live with him, to witness the partnership that had grown between man and wild animal. He spoke about trust, patience, and respect, emphasizing that no creature could truly be controlled. Understanding was the key. People listened, fascinated and moved, and some returned home with a renewed appreciation for the natural world and the creatures who inhabited it. Daniel understood that Luna's legacy extended beyond the ranch. It was a lesson in coexistence, courage, and empathy that could touch the lives of anyone willing to learn. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel and Luna stood together on a small rise overlooking the plains. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and the distant mountains glowed in the fading light. Luna sat beside him, her body relaxed but her eyes still vigilant. Daniel spoke softly, as he often did, sharing thoughts and reflections that he knew she could not understand with words but would grasp in spirit. "You've changed my life," he said. "You've taught me more than I ever imagined possible." Luna's ears twitched, and she rested her head on her paws as if acknowledging his words. As the years passed, Luna became legendary in the region. Travelers told stories of the wolf who guarded a ranch, not as a pet, but as a wise and fearless companion. Children spoke of her in whispers of awe, imagining the adventures she might have beyond the fields. Daniel never sought fame, and he never exaggerated her deeds. The truth was enough. Luna was remarkable not because she was extraordinary in some abstract sense, but because she had chosen to trust, protect, and teach him. She was extraordinary because of her spirit, her intelligence, and her courage. Daniel often reflected on the simple, profound truth that had guided their journey. He had not purchased Luna to save himself. He had brought her into his life with respect, curiosity, and care, and in return she had saved him in countless ways. She had protected the ranch, taught him patience, and opened his eyes to the wild, untamed beauty of the world. She had reminded him that life was richer when approached with understanding rather than control, and that true companionship required respect, trust, and freedom. By the time Daniel grew older, he realized that Luna had left an indelible mark on his life. She had transformed the ranch from a quiet, predictable place into a living, breathing environment filled with energy, intelligence, and the beauty of connection. He often thought of the day he had first seen her in the cage, the warning from the Apache trader, and the slow steps of trust that had led them to this moment. Every choice, every moment of patience, every gesture of understanding had brought them here, to a bond that was unbreakable and life-changing. Even as new challenges arose, storms, predators, or the demands of the land, Daniel faced them with confidence because he knew he was not alone. Luna had become more than a wolf. She was a guardian, a teacher, and a friend. Together, they had learned to navigate the world, survive its dangers, and embrace its beauty. Their bond had become a source of strength, inspiration, and guidance, a reminder that life's greatest rewards often came from unexpected places and unlikely companions. As the sun rose each morning and painted the plains in shades of gold and orange, Daniel would walk with Luna at his side. He marveled at the simple joy of their shared life, the rustle of grass beneath their feet, the distant calls of birds, the quiet strength of the cattle grazing peacefully. Luna's presence reminded him that life was not only about survival, but also about connection, understanding, and the courage to respect the freedom of others. She had taught him to see the world with new eyes, to appreciate the small wonders, and to embrace the responsibilities that came with companionship. In the quiet moments, Daniel often reflected on the lessons that Luna had imparted. Courage, he realized, was not about fearlessness, but about facing challenges with intelligence, instinct, and heart. Trust was not demanded but earned through respect and care. Freedom was not about absence of boundaries, but about honoring the choices of others. And love, he understood, could exist without possession. It could thrive in respect, understanding, and mutual reliance. Luna had taught him all of this without words, simply by being herself. Years later, Daniel would tell his story, not to claim credit or boast, but to share a truth he had learned. Life could be richer, deeper, and more meaningful when approached with respect, empathy, and understanding. Luna had entered his life not as a pet or a possession, but as a partner, teacher, and guardian. And in return, she had allowed him to witness the brilliance of her spirit, to learn from her instincts, and to share in the extraordinary bond between human and wild animal. When Daniel looked across the plains and saw Luna standing at the horizon, her silhouette strong and proud, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their journey had been one of patience, respect, and mutual growth. She had changed his life, shaped his understanding of the world, and given him a bond that was rare and precious. He knew that no matter what the future held, the lessons of courage, loyalty, and freedom that Luna had taught him would stay with him forever. And so, the ranch thrived not just as a place of work, but as a place of life, learning, and connection. Daniel and Luna continued to walk the plains together, side by side, companions in the truest sense, bound by trust, respect, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them over the years. Their story, though simple in its telling, became a living testament to the power of patience, empathy, and the extraordinary bond that could exist between human and wild creature, a bond that could endure, inspire, and transform lives for generations to come.